Hello, my name is Rustin Perret, and my project is on vocal coordination between male and female Carolina Wrens with the help of my advisor, Dr. Jordan Price at St. Mary's College of Maryland. So just for a bit of background, female song is surprisingly widespread and ancestral in songbirds. And I say surprisingly because many of us have this idea that female song doesn't really exist in that many species and that it's mostly the males who sing. And this is an idea which goes all the way back to Charles Darwin himself. But this isn't true because most birds do have female song, and this is especially true in the tropics, although it's not really true in a lot of temperate areas where female song is much more uncommon. And there are a lot of traits that are associated with the loss of female song, like migration, a lack of year-round territoriality, and a lack of social monogamy. Of all songbirds, wrens in particular are known for their really complex male-female duets and for female song. And the ancestor of modern wrens likely did have female song, and if you'd like to hear more about that, you should check out Mira Wilson's presentation. So my project focused on a particular kind of wren, the Carolina wren. They look like this, and they're really common suburban birds in much of the eastern United States, so it's really possible that you've heard them singing at some point. And they're an interesting species to study because they possess many of the behavioral traits associated with male and female song, male and female duetting, and with female song, but they're a temperate species. And these traits that they possess are social monogamy, males and females will mate for life, they're year-round residents in the eastern United States, and both members of a mated pair will stay on the same territory throughout the duration of the year. Males in particular are prolific singers, which typically have over 30 different song types, which is really high, even for a songbird. Females, however, do not sing like the males do, but they do produce a rattle call, which can overlap with a male's song. And this has led some people to question whether the Carolina wren is in fact a duetting species or not. So to determine if Carolina wrens duet or not, we need to first determine what a duet is. And for the purposes of my project, I used this definition, which defines a duet as any coordinated singing by males and females of the same species at the same time. Now the key word here is coordinated, because any two male and female birds can overlap randomly, and this wouldn't be considered a duet, nor should it be. But then how do you tell if an overlap is coordinated or not between two birds? And this is a question which can be very difficult to answer, which is why I used a program created by Dr. Christina Mascow and her colleagues called the Song Overlap Null Hypothesis Generator, or SONG for short. And what this does is it randomizes song performances, then calculates the probability that the overlap of two individuals is not random. To illustrate how this works, let's say you have this example recording here, where individual A and individual B are supposedly performing a duet, and they have this overlap here represented by the gray bar. Now what song will do is it will randomize the vocal performance of one of these two individuals, in this case it's individual B, and then it will measure the amount of overlap from the randomized performance, and then it will repeat this randomization process hundreds or even thousands of times to determine the most likely amount of overlap for this given interaction. And then it will compare this most likely amount of overlap to the actual amount of overlap to see if the overlap in the original recording was significant or not. My methods involved first recording instances of male and female vocal interaction between two Carolina wrens on the campus of St. Mary's College of Maryland using equipment loaned to me by Dr. Jordan Price. And then using these recordings, I would mark the start and end time of each male and female vocalization in Raven Pro, and then upload these start and end times into Song to determine the randomness of the overlap that was present. Now, this wasn't the only analysis that I did by any stretch of the imagination. I also recorded which individual sings first in the overlapping calls. And then I also did a secondary analysis where I modified all the data so that all the male songs are 3 seconds long. And I did this to see if females were overlapping with the male songs themselves or just starting their vocalizations in a 3-second period after the males started singing. And then I also analyzed these 3-second modified data sets, similarly to how I analyzed the original data sets by using Song. And so I would get spectrograms like these when I uploaded my recordings. This is an example of a pretty typical Carolina wren spectrogram that shows overlap between males and females. The male song is represented by selection number 2, and the female's rattle is represented by selection number 1. And as you can see, the male typically starts the vocal interaction, and then the female joins in about a half second later. And this is pretty typical. However, there were some unusual variations in these male-female Carolina Wren interactions. For example, in recordings like this one, it appears as though the female is trying to avoid overlapping the male because she cuts off her rattle right when the male starts singing and then picks it up right after the male finishes. So this leads me to believe that the female, for some reason, is purposefully avoiding overlapping the male, even though in many other instances, males and females would seem like they were purposefully overlapping their calls. Although interactions like this were very uncommon, and I only observed this a couple different times. So my results show non-random overlap being observed in roughly half of all the recordings that I collected. Now, this doesn't really sound like anything that's really worth talking about, but it's pretty comparable to other species of songbirds that are known to form duets and species that are known to have female song. And furthermore, female behavior with respect to the males yielded relatively low p-values. So these are instances where the female's vocal performance is being randomized by song and the male's performance is being kept constant. Additionally, you can see from this graph that there really wasn't any difference between the original recordings and those that I modified to have constant 3-second male songs. Now, this result of female behavior with respect to males yielding lower p-values could have something to do with my third major result, which is that male wrens began the duets about 86% of the time. Now, this shows that males are clearly the ones leading the duets, because if they weren't and there was no bird leading the duet, then this statistic would be about 50-50, but that's not the case at all. Now, this impacts the p-values that come out of song because song only considers overlap to be valid when the individual whose performance is randomized begins their song after the other individual whose performance is being kept constant. And since males begin the overlap most of the time, song usually didn't recognize any overlap in a male's performance with a female. So as for what I think these results mean, I think they show pretty conclusively that Carolina Wrens are in fact a duetting species. Although the function of this duet is somewhat unclear. It could have something to do with males and females cooperatively defending their territory. It could have something to do with males and females protecting their mate from outside intruders, or it could have something to do with intra-pair communication, where males and females are trying to communicate with each other through these duets. Personally, I have evidence to support the cooperative territory defense theory because of a recording I took back in February, which seems to show two separate pairs of wrens countersinging with each other, almost as if they're having a territorial dispute. You can see this here. Selections 1 and selections 5 represent a male and a female that are paired, countersinging with another pair represented by selections 2 and selection 6. So as you can see, the first pair starts singing, and then they are overlapped by the second pair, which seems to be an aggressive territorial display. And that's repeated here in selections 3, 7, 8, and 4. So additionally, I think these results kind of show that female song isn't this dichotomous trait where you either have it or you don't, that it's more of a spectrum, and that Carolina Wrens represent an intermediate point on that spectrum, where at one end you have species like the plain-tailed wren, which have complex and coordinated male-female duets and female song, and on the other end you have house wrens, which are a temperate species where there's no female song and as a result no male-female duetting. And so there are Carolina Wrens here in the middle, which have duetting but very limited female vocalizations. And I think this brings up a lot of really interesting questions for future study about where certain songbird species fit onto the spectrum and why they display a certain level of female song. So for this project, I have to give special thanks first to Dr. Christina Mascow, who was nice enough to answer any and all questions that I had about song. And her advice was very, very useful while I was completing my project. Second, to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where I got lots of background info on wrens, especially Carolina wrens. Third, to Dr. Jeffrey Lombardo at St. Mary's College of Maryland, who helped me with the data analysis in R when I had any kind of problems. And lastly, to Dr. Price. His name isn't on the slide because it was on the title slide, but he did loan me his recording equipment for this project, in addition to being extremely helpful throughout the course of this project in a number of different ways. Thank you guys for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.